Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt like they were hiding something? Like they were carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, yet when you asked if they were okay, they just smiled and said, "I'm fine." But they're not fine. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. We live in a world that glorifies strength, but what kind of strength? The kind that forces people to suppress their emotions, to act like nothing phases them, to carry burdens in silence. Society teaches us that pain is a sign of weakness, that struggling is something to be ashamed of. So people pretend. They smile, they push through, they act like everything is under control, until one day it's not. This is not just a personal struggle, it's an epidemic. People are suffering in silence, believing that no one will understand, that their pain is too small to matter, or that showing vulnerability will make them a burden. But here's the truth: silence is not strength. Ignoring pain doesn't make it go away. It festers, it grows, it destroys. How many times have you told yourself, "It's nothing, I'll be fine"? How many times have you swallowed your pain, convinced that no one would care even if you spoke up? And here's the bigger question: how much longer can you keep pretending? What if I told you that the very thing you've been avoiding, acknowledging your pain, speaking about it, facing it head on, is the key to true strength? Not the kind of strength that looks good on the outside, but the kind that builds resilience, self-awareness, and a deeper connection with others. This isn't about self-pity. It's about self-mastery. It's about embracing stoicism in a way that helps you confront pain rather than bury it. By the end of this, you'll understand why pretending isn't the answer, why carrying pain in silence only leads to destruction, and most importantly, how to break free from it. You'll discover the power of vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as a path to something greater. You'll learn how Stoicism can teach you to master your emotions instead of being ruled by them, how Stoic relationships can offer strength instead of isolation, and how facing pain can be the beginning of real healing. But be warned, once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Are you ready to face it? 1. The silent suffering. What does suffering in silence feel like? It's waking up every day and putting on a mask so no one notices the storm inside. It's convincing yourself that you're okay because admitting otherwise would be too painful. It's looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger, someone who smiles, who functions, who does what they're supposed to do, but who is slowly fading away. Why do people choose silence? Is it pride, fear, a belief that their pain is insignificant? Maybe all of the above. The truth is, most people suffer in silence because they don't believe they have a choice. Society has trained us to believe that talking about pain makes us weak, that complaining is ungrateful, that vulnerability is dangerous. Think about the last time you wanted to cry but didn't. The last time you wanted to tell someone you were struggling but stopped yourself. What held you back? Maybe you thought no one would understand. Maybe you didn't want to be a burden. Maybe you believed that your pain was not bad enough compared to what others are going through. But pain doesn't work that way. It doesn't measure itself against others. It just exists. And when it's ignored, it only gets louder. The irony is that the more people pretend they're okay, the more isolated they become. Have you ever noticed that when someone seems strong all the time, people stop checking in on them? They assume, oh, they've got it under control. But inside, that person is screaming, waiting for someone to see past the act. And here's the most dangerous part. Silence doesn't just keep pain hidden, it makes it grow. Suppressed emotions don't disappear, they manifest in other ways. Anxiety, depression, self-destructive behaviors, even physical illness. Studies have shown that chronic stress and emotional suppression lead to severe health issues, heart disease, weakened immune systems, insomnia, and more. Yet people still pretend. They tell themselves it's not a big deal, that they can handle it, that as long as they keep moving forward, they'll eventually outrun the pain. But pain doesn't work that way. It follows you. It seeps into everything you do. It affects the way you think, the way you interact with others, the way you see yourself. The world tells us to be tough, to endure, to suppress what hurts and move on. But what happens when moving on isn't possible? What happens when the weight of it all finally becomes too much? Some people turn to distractions, work, social media, entertainment, anything to numb the pain. Others turn inward, withdrawing from the world, avoiding connection, hoping that solitude will somehow bring relief. But silence doesn't heal, it isolates. And in that isolation, pain thrives. This is where the danger lies, not in the suffering itself, but in the belief that it must be endured alone. Stoicism often gets misinterpreted as emotional detachment, as if being stoic means feeling nothing at all. But true Stoicism is about understanding emotions, not ignoring them. It's about facing pain with clarity, not pretending it doesn't exist. The strongest individuals are not the ones who suppress their suffering. They are the ones who acknowledge it, learn from it, and refuse to let it define them. The mind is powerful, but it can also be deceptive. It convinces us that we must handle everything on our own, that admitting struggle is a failure. It whispers that if we just endure a little longer, the pain will fade on its own. But has that ever worked? How many people have waited for pain to disappear only to find it growing stronger? This cycle is not new. It has existed for centuries, woven into the fabric of human nature. People have always worn masks, always hidden their struggles behind forced smiles and empty reassurances. The question is, why do we keep repeating the same patterns? What if we didn't? What if instead of pretending, we faced our pain directly? Imagine a world where suffering wasn't seen as shameful, where speaking about pain wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. A world where people didn't feel the need to pretend. It sounds idealistic, doesn't it? But why should it? What's stopping us from making that a reality? The truth is, many people don't know how to stop pretending. They've done it for so long that it has become their default state. They tell themselves that no one would care, that their suffering is insignificant, that they just need to push through. But the human spirit is not meant to endure endless suffering alone. It is meant to adapt, to overcome, to grow, not in isolation, but in connection. Stoicism teaches us that pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. It teaches us that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can control how we respond. That response, however, should not be denial. It should be understanding. Strength is not found in suppressing pain, but in confronting it. Imagine you're walking through a storm. The wind is relentless, the rain is pounding, and you're struggling to see the path ahead. You can pretend the storm isn't there, but that won't change the fact that you're getting soaked, that the wind is pushing you back, that every step is a battle. Or you can acknowledge it. You can brace yourself against the wind, find shelter when needed, and move forward with intention. That is the difference between pretending and confronting. The storm doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It only passes when you face it. The same is true for pain. It is not weakness to acknowledge it. It is not failure to admit that you are struggling. In fact, it is the first step to true resilience. But not everyone is ready to take that step. Many will continue to pretend, to suppress, to endure in silence, until one day they can't anymore, until the weight of it all breaks them, until they realize that suffering alone is not strength, it is self-destruction. But what if it didn't have to reach that point? What if, instead of breaking, we allowed ourselves to heal? What if we saw vulnerability not as a risk, but as a necessity? This is the challenge we all face, not just as individuals, but as a society, to redefine what strength truly means, to create spaces where people feel safe enough to be honest about their pain, to remind each other that no one has to carry their burdens alone. The strongest relationships, Stoic relationships built on honesty and understanding, are the ones that allow space for struggle, not just success. The most powerful individuals are not those who feel nothing, but those who feel deeply and do not let it consume them. Pain does not make us weak. Ignoring it does. So ask yourself, how much of your life have you spent pretending? How many times? Have you suffered in silence, convinced that no one would notice, no one would care? And most importantly, how much longer will you let that continue? 2. The mask of strength. Everyone knows someone who seems unshakable. The person who never complains, never shows weakness, always seems to have it together. They handle crises like they were built for them. No hesitation, no panic, just a quiet, composed exterior. They're the ones others look up to, the ones people lean on, the ones who always seem to have the right words. But what if I told you that many of these people are the ones suffering the most? That behind the mask of strength, they are drowning in a pain no one sees. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. Strength, at least the way society defines it, has become a double-edged sword. We admire resilience, but we misunderstand it. We assume that being strong means being unaffected, that a truly strong person doesn't break, doesn't cry, doesn't need anyone. We celebrate endurance, but we forget that endurance without relief leads to collapse. The strongest among us are often the ones who never let themselves rest, never allow themselves to be vulnerable, never admit, out loud or even to themselves, that they are reaching their limit. But no one is limitless. Everyone has a breaking point. This mask of strength is one of the most deceptive and dangerous illusions we create. It convinces people that as long as they keep going, as long as they don't let their pain show, everything will be fine. They push through exhaustion, suppress their emotions, tell themselves they can handle it, and maybe for a while they can. But the weight keeps adding up. The stress, the expectations, the emotional strain, it all piles on, layer by layer, until one day it's too much. And when that day comes, it doesn't just manifest as a single bad moment. It erupts as burnout, as a breakdown, as a sudden realization that they've spent years carrying something that was never meant to be. Carried alone, and yet they'll still tell themselves they're fine. They'll say, it's nothing, even as the exhaustion seeps into their bones, even as they struggle to get out of bed, even as they feel themselves becoming someone they don't recognize. They will continue to pretend because they believe. They have no other choice, because they fear what will happen if they take off the mask. But let's talk about that for a second. What would happen if they did? What if, instead of pretending, they allowed themselves to be seen fully? Honestly, would the world really crumble? Would the people who depend on them abandon them? Or would they finally realize that strength isn't about pretending nothing hurts? It's about acknowledging the hurt and facing it anyway. Stoicism is often misunderstood in this context. Many people believe it means suppressing emotions, ignoring pain, becoming indifferent. But true Stoicism is not about denial, it's about control. It's about mastering emotions, not erasing them. It's about understanding pain, not pretending it doesn't exist. A truly strong person is not the one who never struggles, but the one who knows when to ask for help. The one who knows that resilience is not about standing alone, but about learning to stand in the face of adversity without losing themselves. But here's the problem. The world rewards those who wear the mask well. Society praises the ones who keep it together, who don't complain, who always find a way to push forward. These people become the go-to leaders, the reliable ones, the problem solvers. And while that recognition might feel validating, at first, it also becomes a trap. Because now they feel like they can never let their guard down. They become the person who never says no, the one who takes on too much, the one who absorbs stress like a sponge, until they reach a point where they can't absorb anymore. And still, they pretend, because they don't want to disappoint anyone, because they don't want to seem weak, because they don't know how to exist without the mask. This is the hidden cost of the illusion of strength. People who always appear strong are often the ones least checked on. They are assumed to be fine, assumed to be capable, assumed to be handling everything with ease, but no one asks, "Are you okay?" Because no one thinks they need to, and so their struggles remain unseen. Their pain goes unacknowledged. Their exhaustion continues to build until one day they can't pretend anymore. And by then, the damage has already been done. So if you're watching this right now and you recognize yourself in these words, if you are someone who always acts strong, who never lets others see your pain, ask yourself, is it really strength if it's killing you? What are you holding on to and why? Who are you pretending for? And most importantly, what would happen if you let go? If you stopped pretending? If you allowed yourself to feel, to rest, to be human? Would the world really turn against you, or would you finally start to heal? Strength should not be measured by how much pain you can hide. It should be measured by how well you navigate pain without letting it consume you. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit that you're not okay, that you don't have all the answers, that you need time, space, help, because the moment you acknowledge that truth, you begin to take back control. You begin to reclaim your energy, your clarity, your sense of self. You begin to step out of the illusion and into something real. If this resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Let's break this cycle together. Like this video and comment #1 if this message speaks to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we're just getting started and there's so much more to uncover. 3. Emotional and physical consequences. Pain does not simply disappear because it is ignored. It does not vanish just because someone refuses to acknowledge it. Instead, it lingers, burrowing itself deep into the mind and body, manifesting in ways that are often invisible until they are not. The illusion of strength, the constant act of pretending that everything is fine, does not protect a person from suffering. It only changes the form in which that suffering appears. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. Not just emotionally, but physically. The body keeps score. Every suppressed emotion, every unspoken fear, every moment of suffering that is locked away instead of processed leaves an imprint. The weight of unacknowledged pain does not remain contained. It leaks out through stress, through anxiety, through an ever-growing exhaustion that no amount of rest can seem to cure. The body begins to rebel in ways that are easy to dismiss. At first, headaches that seem to come out of nowhere, a tightness in the chest, shallow breaths, an uneasiness that lingers without explanation. But the more pain is ignored, the more persistent it becomes. Over time, stress becomes chronic. The nervous system remains in a constant state of tension, never fully relaxing, never allowing the body to reset. Cortisol levels stay elevated, wearing down the immune system, making the body more vulnerable to illness, slowing down healing, draining energy. Sleep becomes elusive. Either it does not come at all, or it arrives in broken, restless fragments, leaving a person feeling just as exhausted in the morning as they were the night before. The digestive system suffers, the muscles stay tense, the heart works harder than it should, and yet they keep pretending. They keep pushing. They tell themselves that the discomfort is normal, that the exhaustion is just part of life, that everyone feels this way, but not everyone does. Not everyone carries this unseen burden, this relentless inner war between what they feel and what they allow the world to see. the emotional consequences are just as insidious. At first, the act of suppression feels like control. They convince themselves that by refusing to acknowledge pain, they are mastering it. But real control does not come from avoidance. It comes from understanding, from facing what is difficult instead of running from it. Suppressed emotions do not simply go away, they become something else. They turn into irritability, into resentment, into an underlying sense of emptiness that no amount of external success or distraction can seem to fill. They begin to disconnect, not just from their pain, but from joy, from excitement, from love. Because when a person learns to suppress one emotion, they inevitably dull them all. They become detached, distant, unable to fully experience life because they have trained themselves to feel nothing too deeply. And yet, the emotions remain. They manifest in unexpected moments, breaking through the cracks of the carefully maintained facade. Sudden bursts of anger over small things, uncontrollable tears that seem to come from nowhere, a deep sense of loneliness, even in the presence of others. They wonder why they feel this way when everything in their life appears fine, but nothing is fine when pain is left unresolved. Nothing is fine when the soul is exhausted from carrying what was never meant to be carried alone. For some, the consequences go even further. Anxiety becomes a constant companion, whispering worst-case scenarios in moments of quiet. Depression settles in like an unwelcome guest, draining motivation, making even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. The mind turns against itself, replaying past mistakes, fueling self-doubt, making it harder and harder to believe that things will ever change. And in the darkest moments, some begin to wonder if continuing to pretend is even worth it, if carrying this weight alone is sustainable, if they can endure another day of feeling like a stranger in their own life. But still, they say nothing, because society has taught them that their struggles are theirs alone to bear, that to admit suffering is to admit failure, that seeking help is a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. They fear judgment. They fear being seen as fragile. They fear that if they let go of the mask, they will be left with nothing to hold on to. And so, they keep pretending until the body gives out, until the mind reaches a breaking point, until something forces them to confront the truth they have spent so long avoiding. The damage is not always sudden. Sometimes it accumulates slowly, unnoticed until it becomes undeniable. A heart attack at an early age, a diagnosis that could have been prevented, a mind so drained that it can no longer find joy in the things that once brought it. And when that moment comes, they finally realize they were never truly in control. Avoidance was never a solution. The pain did not disappear. It only found new ways to make itself known. But it does not have to be this way. The cycle of suppression and suffering is not inevitable. There is another path, one that requires courage, but leads to freedom. The first step is acknowledgement, to stop pretending, even if only in private, to admit that the weight is heavy, to recognize that real strength is not in how much one can endure alone, but in the willingness to confront what is difficult. The second step is to release the illusion that emotions must be fought against. They are not enemies, they are messengers, signals from within, guiding a person toward what needs to be addressed, what needs to be healed. Suppressing them does not make them disappear. It only distorts their purpose. And finally, the realization that healing is not weakness, that asking for help is not failure, that opening up, sharing, allowing oneself to be seen, not just in moments of strength, but in moments of struggle, is not a betrayal of resilience, but a deeper expression of it. The strongest individuals are not those who suffer in silence. They are the ones who know when to lay down their armor, who understand that real control comes from facing, not avoiding, who recognize that pain is not a flaw to be hidden, but a challenge to be overcome. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them, and it will continue to do so unless they make a different choice. 4. Why they choose silence. Why do people keep their pain to themselves? Why do they choose silence when their minds are screaming for relief? It's not that they don't feel the weight of their suffering, it's that they've convinced themselves they must carry it alone. Somewhere along the way, they learned that vulnerability is dangerous, that admitting struggle is a sign of weakness, that talking about pain makes them a burden. So they suppress, they endure, they force themselves to appear strong, even when everything inside them is unraveling. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. For many, silence is a survival mechanism. They were taught either by experience or by society that expressing pain leads to rejection. Maybe they once opened up and were met with indifference, with dismissiveness, with the dreaded words, "Everyone goes through things, just deal with it." Maybe they watched others be ridiculed for their struggles, labeled as weak, treated as if their emotions were a nuisance. So they learned to hide it. They learned to push it down, to pretend it wasn't there, to become the person who never complains, never asks for help, never shows cracks in the armor. And the more they suppress, the more it becomes second nature. They convince themselves that suffering in silence is just how life is supposed to be. But suffering in silence doesn't make the pain disappear. It only isolates. It creates a wall between them and the world, a barrier that keeps them from fully connecting with others. They may be surrounded by people, but deep down, they feel alone. And in that loneliness, the pain intensifies. But still, they choose silence, because speaking up feels riskier than suffering alone, because the fear of being misunderstood, of being seen as weak, of being dismissed yet again, is stronger than the desire for relief. Society does not make it easy to be honest about pain. There is an expectation to be okay at all times, to keep going no matter what, to push through as if emotions are inconveniences rather than fundamental parts of being human. And this expectation is especially heavy for men. From a young age, boys are told not to cry, not to show weakness, not to express emotion. They grow up believing that strength is measured by how much they can endure without breaking, so they harden themselves. They become the ones who never falter, who never ask for support, who take on everything alone. And even when they're breaking inside, they keep going, because that's what they were conditioned to do. But this is not just about men. Women, too, face their own version of this struggle. They are often expected to be emotional, but only in a controlled, acceptable way. If they express too much, they are labeled as overly sensitive, as dramatic, as unstable. So they too learn to suppress. They learn to smile when they don't feel like smiling, to say "I'm fine" when they are anything but. They learn that their pain must be hidden, neatly packaged beneath layers of composure, because the world is not interested in their suffering. It is only interested in what they can offer despite it. And then there are those who convince themselves that their pain is insignificant compared to others. Other people have it worse, they tell themselves. What right do I have to complain? So they minimize their own suffering, invalidate their own emotions, dismiss their own struggles as unworthy of attention. But pain does not work. That way, it does not need to be the worst in order to be real. It does not need to be compared to anyone else's to be valid. The idea that only certain types of suffering are worth acknowledging is a lie that keeps people trapped in silence, making them believe that unless their pain is catastrophic, it doesn't count. But it does count. It always counts, and the more it is ignored, the more damage it causes. Because pain does not disappear when it is suppressed, it festers. It grows in the shadows, turning into anxiety, into depression, into exhaustion that no amount of sleep can cure. It seeps into daily life, affecting relationships, work, self-worth. It alters the way a person sees themselves, making them believe they are not strong enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough to be heard. And the longer they stay silent, the harder it becomes to speak. Some people believe that by keeping their struggles hidden, they are protecting others. They don't want to be a burden, don't want to bring negativity into someone else's life. They tell themselves that by pretending to be okay, they are doing the right thing, that it's better this way. But this too is a lie, because silence does not protect, it isolates. It creates distance, builds walls, keeps people from truly understanding one another. And what they fail to realize is that by pretending to be okay, they are not protecting anyone. They are only depriving themselves of the connection and support that could save them. Real strength is not in how much pain a person can endure alone. It is in knowing when to let someone in. It is in understanding that no one is meant to carry everything by themselves. The strongest people are not those who suffer in silence, but those who recognize when they need support and are willing to reach for it. And yet so many resist this truth. They hold on to their silence as if it is their last defense, as if speaking up will somehow make everything worse. But what if it doesn't? What if, instead of rejection, they find understanding? What if, instead of judgment, they find compassion? The world needs to change the way it sees strength. It needs to stop glorifying endurance and start valuing honesty. It needs to stop shaming vulnerability and start recognizing it for what it truly is, a form of courage. Because pretending does not make someone strong. Hiding pain does not make someone brave. The real bravery is in facing the truth, in stepping out of the shadows, in allowing oneself to be seen, not just in moments of triumph, but in moments of struggle. If you've made it this far, if any part of this resonates with you, then maybe it's time to ask yourself, what are you holding in? What are you afraid will happen if you let it out? And most importantly, how much longer will you allow silence to dictate your life? Like this video and comment number 1 if this message speaks to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. And together, we are going to uncover the truths that no one talks about, but everyone needs to hear. 5. The breaking point. There is only so much a person can carry before the weight becomes unbearable. They can pretend they're fine, smile through the pain, convince themselves that they are strong enough to handle everything alone. They can suppress, ignore, push forward as if nothing is wrong. But there comes a moment when the burden becomes too heavy, when the act of pretending is no longer sustainable, when the pressure that has been building for so long finally erupts. This is the breaking point. And for those who have spent years, maybe even a lifetime, hiding their struggles, it does not come as a slow realization. It comes as a collapse. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. And when the breaking point arrives, they can no longer hide from that truth. For some, the breaking point is quiet. It is not an explosion, but an emptiness, a numbness that spreads through every part of their life. They wake up one day and feel nothing, not sadness, not anger, not even exhaustion, just a hollow absence of emotion. Things that once brought them joy no longer matter. Conversations feel distant, like they are watching their own life from the outside, disconnected from everything, including themselves. This is the result of years of emotional suppression. The mind, unable to cope with the weight of unprocessed pain, begins to shut down. It goes into survival mode, conserving energy by numbing everything. The person continues to function, goes to work, interacts with others, does what is expected of them, but inside, they are barely holding on. They are physically present, but emotionally absent, unable to fully engage with the world around them. And because they have spent so long pretending to be fine, no one notices the difference. For others, the breaking point is not silent, it is destructive. It is years of bottled-up emotions bursting all at once. It is anger that cannot be contained, outbursts that seem to come from nowhere, lashing out at those closest to them, pushing people away even when they don't want to. It is a sudden inability to control reactions, as if something inside them has snapped. This kind of breaking point is dangerous, not just because of its intensity, but because it often leads to regret. They say things they don't mean, make choices they never would have considered, burn bridges that they later wish they could rebuild. And after the storm passes, they are left with guilt, shame, and the realization that pretending for so long has only made everything worse. Then there are those whose breaking point turns inward. Instead of lashing out, they withdraw. They isolate themselves, cut off communication, stop showing up to the things they once cared about. They stop reaching out, stop answering messages, stop engaging with the world. They convince themselves that no one would notice if they disappeared, that their presence is not needed, that their struggles are theirs alone to bear. And the longer they stay in that isolation, the deeper the darkness grows. Thoughts that were once fleeting doubts become constant whispers, telling them that they are not enough, that they have failed, that they are alone in a world that does not care. This is the most dangerous breaking point of all because it happens in silence, and no one sees it coming until it's too late. The body and mind are not designed to carry endless stress without release. Every person has a limit, no matter how strong they believe themselves to be. And when that limit is reached, the consequences are not just emotional, they are physical. The immune system weakens, illness becomes frequent, chronic fatigue sets in, heart disease, high blood pressure, digestive issues. These are all linked to prolonged stress and emotional suppression. The body cannot lie. It will always reveal the truth that the mind tries to ignore. And yet even when these physical symptoms appear, many people continue to push through. They tell themselves it's just exhaustion, just a phase, just something they need to get over. But the longer they delay facing their pain, the worse it becomes. Breaking points do not happen suddenly. They are the result of years, sometimes decades, of accumulated stress, unresolved trauma, and emotional neglect. They are the inevitable consequence of a culture that values endurance over emotional well-being, that praises those who push through while ignoring the cost of that endurance. And because breaking points are not openly discussed, most people believe they are alone in experiencing them. They see others who appear to be handling life effortlessly and assume that they are the only ones struggling. But this illusion is dangerous. It keeps people trapped in isolation, believing that they must continue pretending even when they are falling apart inside. Stoicism teaches that suffering is an unavoidable part of life, but it does not teach that suffering should be ignored. There is a difference between enduring pain and refusing to acknowledge it. True Stoicism is about facing reality with clarity, about understanding emotions rather than suppressing them. It is about knowing that strength is not found in how much one can endure in silence, but in how well one can navigate hardship with wisdom and self-awareness. A person who refuses to acknowledge their struggles is not strong, they are in denial. And denial is not resilience, it is a slow form of self-destruction. The strongest individuals are not those who never break, they are those who understand when they need to step back, when they need to rest, when they need to allow themselves to be human. There is no shame in reaching a breaking point. It is not failure. It is a signal, a message from the body and mind that something must change. The real failure is ignoring that signal and continuing down the same path, hoping that things will improve on their own. They will not without action, not without confronting what has been buried for so long. But what does that confrontation look like? It starts with honesty, with admitting, even if only to oneself, that things are not okay. that the weight being carried is too much, that pretending is no longer an option. It means recognizing that asking for help is not a weakness, but a necessity. It means understanding that no one, not a single person, was meant to endure life's struggles completely alone. Human beings are wired for connection, for support, for shared burdens. And yet, so many resist this truth, convinced that they must prove their strength by standing alone. But what if true strength is found in allowing oneself to be supported? What if resilience is not about how much pain one can carry, but about knowing when to put some of it down? There is no single way that people reach their breaking points, but there is one universal truth. Ignoring pain does not make it disappear. It only delays the inevitable. And the longer it is delayed, the harder the fall will be when it finally comes. The world is full of people who are on the edge, who are exhausted from pretending, who are nearing their breaking point but do not know how to stop. Some of them will reach out, some will take steps toward healing, but others will continue to pretend until they can't anymore. And by then, the damage may be irreversible. So what now? What happens after the breaking point? That choice is up to each person. Some will continue the cycle, trying to rebuild the mask, convincing themselves that they just need to be stronger. But others will decide that enough is enough, that it is time to face what has been ignored for too long, that it is time to choose something different. Because no one can outrun pain forever. No one can pretend indefinitely. At some point, every person must ask themselves the question, how much longer am I willing to let this destroy me? And for those who are brave enough to answer honestly, the path to something better begins. 6. How to help and heal. For those who have spent a lifetime pretending that everything is fine, the idea of healing can feel impossible. The weight of all the unspoken emotions, the years of suppressing pain, the belief that vulnerability is weakness, it all creates a wall that feels unbreakable. But no wall is truly unbreakable. Every barrier that was built can be dismantled. Every layer of armor that was put on can be removed. The process is not easy. It requires unlearning. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths, and most of all, it requires a willingness to change. But it is possible. The choice is simple. Continue down the same path, pretending that nothing is wrong until the weight of it finally breaks you, or take the first step towards something better. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them, and it will keep killing them unless they decide to stop pretending. Healing begins with honesty. The first and most difficult step is admitting, even if only to oneself, that something is wrong, that the pain is real, that the exhaustion is not normal, that the way they have been living is not sustainable. Many people avoid this step because they fear what comes next. They worry that if they acknowledge their struggles, they will lose control, that everything will come crashing down. But the reality is that they are already losing control. They are already on the verge of collapse. Ignoring it will not change that. Acknowledging pain does not make it worse. It makes it manageable. It turns something overwhelming into something that can be understood and worked through. The mind fears what it does not confront. But once something is faced directly, it loses its power to control. The next step is breaking the silence. This does not mean announcing struggles to the world, but it does mean letting someone in. A friend, a therapist, a mentor, someone who can listen without judgment, who can remind them that they are not alone. The act of speaking about pain is one of the most powerful things a person can do. It takes something internal and turns it into something external. It shifts the burden from something that is carried alone to something that is shared. And in that sharing, healing begins. The hardest part of suffering in silence is the belief that no one else will understand. But the truth is, more people understand than one might think. Pain is universal. Struggle is universal. And while no two experiences are exactly the same, the emotions behind them are. Stoicism teaches that control is found in how we respond to challenges, not in avoiding them. It is not about suppressing emotions, but about mastering them. It is about recognizing pain, accepting it, and choosing how to move forward. True Stoicism does not mean being emotionless. It means understanding emotions so well that they no longer have the power to control us, and part of that understanding comes from allowing them to be felt. Ignoring pain does not make a person stronger. Facing it does. But this is not something that can be done alone. Healing requires connection. It requires people who are willing to listen, who are willing to remind those who are struggling that they are not broken, that they are not weak, that they are not alone. There is a misconception that asking for help is a sign of failure, but if someone is drowning, would they consider it weak to call for a lifeline? If someone was lost in the wilderness, would they see it as failure to ask for directions? Suffering in silence is not noble, it is self-destructive, and yet so many refuse to reach out, believing that they must figure it out on their own. But no one was meant to walk this path alone. Every great thinker, every philosopher, every leader who has ever achieved true resilience has done so with the support of others. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest figures in Stoicism, did not isolate himself in suffering. He sought wisdom from those around him. He learned from others. He understood the value of shared experience. Strength is not found in solitude. It is found in knowing when to ask for guidance, when to lean on those who can help, when to open up instead of shutting down. Healing also requires letting go of the idea that emotions are weaknesses. They are not. Emotions are messages, signals from within, guiding us toward what needs to be addressed. Ignoring them does not make them disappear. It only distorts them. Anger that is suppressed turns into resentment. Sadness that is ignored turns into numbness. Fear that is buried turns into anxiety. The only way to truly move forward is to allow emotions to be acknowledged, understood, and released. This does not mean being consumed by them. It does not mean letting them dictate every action, but it does mean giving them space to exist, to be processed, to be understood. Another critical part of healing is self-compassion. People who have spent years pretending to be okay often struggle with being kind to themselves. They are their own harshest critics, their own worst enemies. They believe that they must always be strong, always be productive, always be in control. But the truth is, healing cannot happen in an environment of self-punishment. Growth does not come from tearing oneself down. It comes from learning to rebuild. Self-compassion is not weakness. It is a necessity. It is the foundation upon which all real change is built. It is the ability to look in the mirror and say, I am doing my best, and that is enough. It is the willingness to forgive oneself for past mistakes, to allow oneself to rest, to recognize that being human means being imperfect. Healing is also about finding meaning. Pain, when left unexamined, feels pointless. It feels like something unfair, something that only exists to cause suffering. But when it is understood, when it is used as a tool for growth, it becomes something else. It becomes a teacher. It becomes a source of wisdom, of strength, of resilience. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of suffering carries within it a lesson. But that lesson can only be found if one is willing to look for it. This is the difference between those who remain trapped in their pain and those who transform. The pain itself is not what defines them. It is what they do with it that matters. The final step in healing is taking action. Change does not happen by accident. It is not something that occurs passively over time without effort. It is something that must be chosen over and over again. It is in the daily decisions, the decision to reach out instead of isolating, to rest instead of pushing through exhaustion, to speak instead of staying silent. Healing is not a single moment of realization. It is a process, and that process takes time, patience, and commitment. But it is worth it, because the alternative is a life spent pretending, a life spent carrying burdens that were never meant to be carried alone, a life spent waiting for things to get better while doing nothing to make that happen. No one deserves to live that way, and no one has to. The choice to heal is always there. The question is, will it be taken? If you've made it this far, if this message resonates with you, then it's time to take the next step. Like this video and comment number 1 if this speaks to you. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because healing is not a journey meant to be taken alone, and there is more to uncover, more to learn, more to grow from. This is only the beginning. 7. The power of vulnerability. There is a belief deeply ingrained in society that strength means never showing weakness, that the moment a person admits they are struggling, they have lost control. That the second they allow someone to see behind the mask, they have given up power. But what if the opposite is true? What if real strength is not in hiding pain, but in facing it? What if the greatest power a person can have is not in pretending to be unshakable, but in allowing themselves to be vulnerable? They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. And it will continue to kill them until they learn that vulnerability is not weakness. It is survival, it is transformation, it is the path to something greater. Vulnerability is terrifying for those who have spent a lifetime avoiding it. It feels like exposure, like stepping into a battlefield without armor. It is easier to stay guarded, to keep emotions locked away, to maintain the illusion of control. But there is a cost to that control. The more a person suppresses, the more they disconnect, not just from pain, but from life itself. They stop feeling deeply, stop connecting fully, stop experiencing the world in the way they were meant to. They become distant, emotionally numb, unable to truly engage with others, and the worst part, most of them don't even realize it's happening. They have spent so long protecting themselves from pain that they have also shut themselves off from joy, from love, from the very things that make life meaningful. The paradox of vulnerability is that it feels like weakness, but it is actually the foundation of resilience. The strongest people are not those who never break. They are those who allow themselves to feel, to process, to rebuild. They are the ones who have been through pain and have come out the other side, not by ignoring it, but by facing it head on. True Stoicism is not about shutting down emotions. It is about mastering them. It is about knowing when to stand firm and when to let go. It is about understanding that vulnerability is not the enemy, it is the gateway to growth. But why is vulnerability so difficult? Because it requires trust. Trust in oneself, trust in others. Trust that showing emotion will not lead to rejection, that admitting struggle will not lead to judgment. And for many, that trust has been broken before. They have opened up in the past only to be met with indifference, with ridicule, with dismissal. They have been conditioned to believe that the world does not care about their pain, that they are better off keeping it to themselves. But this is a lie. The world is full of people who understand, people who have been through their own struggles, who know what it means to hurt, who are willing to listen. The problem is that those who need connection the most are often the ones least willing to seek it. Vulnerability is also difficult because it forces a person to confront their own fears. The fear of being seen, the fear of being judged, the fear of not being enough. These fears are powerful, but they are also illusions. Because the truth is, every person has struggled. Every person has faced moments of doubt, of pain, of uncertainty. No one is as perfect as they appear. The strongest, most successful individuals in the world have had their own battles, their own moments of weakness. The difference is that they did not allow those moments to define them. They did not let fear keep them from growth. The beauty of vulnerability is that it creates real connection. The relationships that matter, the ones that truly heal, are not built on surface-level interactions. They are built on honesty, on the willingness to be seen, not just in moments of success, but in moments of struggle. This is why Stoic relationships are so powerful. They are not based on illusions. They are not about pretending to be perfect. They are about understanding that real strength is found in openness, in honesty, in the ability to stand beside someone without needing to fix them, without needing to hide anything. But embracing vulnerability is not just about relationships with others. It is about the relationship with oneself. Many people go through life at war with their own emotions, trying to suppress anything that makes them uncomfortable. They push away sadness, they ignore fear, they bury pain so deep that they convince themselves it is gone. But emotions do not disappear, they wait. And when they are ignored for too long, they return stronger than before. The only way to truly move forward is to stop fighting, to stop treating emotions as enemies and start seeing them as guides. Pain is not meant to destroy, it is meant to teach. Fear is not meant to control, it is meant to be understood. The sooner a person realizes this, the sooner they can begin to heal. There is another reason people fear vulnerability: the fear of change. When someone has spent their entire life pretending, the idea of doing anything else feels impossible. Who are they without the mask? What happens when they let go of the act? The unknown is terrifying. It is easier to stay in a familiar pain than to step into unfamiliar freedom. But the longer they cling to the illusion of control, the more they suffer. Change is not the enemy. Change is the only way forward. For those who are still hesitant, who still believe that vulnerability is too risky, ask this: what has pretending ever truly given you? Has it brought peace? Has it made you happy? Has it allowed you to live fully, to connect deeply, to experience the world in the way you were meant to? Or has it left you exhausted? Has it kept you trapped, disconnected, isolated? If the answer is the latter, then maybe it's time for something different. Maybe it's time to stop pretending. Maybe it's time to let go of the need to appear strong and instead focus on becoming truly strong. Not through suppression, not through endurance alone, but through the kind of strength that allows for honesty, for connection, for real growth. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. And it will continue to do so until they decide to stop running, until they decide to face what they have been avoiding, until they realize that vulnerability is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Because in the end, the people who heal, the people who thrive, the people who truly find strength are not the ones who spend their lives pretending. They are the ones who have the courage to be real. They pretend it doesn't hurt, but it's killing them. And for too long, they have convinced themselves that this is the only way, that suffering in silence is strength, that as long as they keep moving, keep smiling, keep pretending, they will eventually outrun the pain. But pain is not something that can be outrun. It does not disappear just because it is ignored. It waits. It lingers beneath the surface, growing stronger with time, shaping thoughts, behaviors, and relationships in ways that are often invisible, until they are not. The weight of unspoken struggles does not stay hidden forever. It manifests in exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix, in emotional numbness that makes even the most joyful moments feel empty, in physical symptoms that seem to have no explanation. And by the time they realize that pretending has only made things worse, they have spent years, sometimes decades, trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. But it does not have to end this way. There is always a choice. The hardest part of healing is admitting that something is wrong, because once that truth is acknowledged, there is no going back. Once a person allows themselves to be honest about their struggles, they can no longer hide behind the illusion of control. But this is not a loss, it is freedom. It is the first step towards something real. Vulnerability is not weakness. Asking for help is not failure. The strongest people are not those who endure in silence, but those who have the courage to face their pain, to break the cycle, to stop pretending. And for those who fear that no one will understand, that they will be judged or rejected for showing their true selves, remember this: there is no greater suffering than living a life where no one truly knows you, where no one has ever seen you, not the real you, not beyond the mask, not beneath the act. The deepest form of connection, the kind that heals, the kind that matters, only happens when a person allows themselves to be seen. So the question is, how much longer will they allow silence to control them? How much longer will they keep pretending? How much longer will they let the fear of vulnerability keep them from the life they were meant to live? Because pain will not wait forever. Eventually, it will demand to be felt. And when that moment comes, they will have two choices: to continue the cycle or to break free, to stay trapped or to step into something different, to keep pretending or to finally, fully, truly be honest with themselves, with others, with the world. The choice is theirs, but the time to make it is now.